And I thought, for two reasons, well, of course, we want to have a question and answer period. And we want you to get to know the candidates because there are no incumbents running, which is kind of unusual. And the third thing is, I want them to get to know you, so that if you have a problem, you can say, I was at that meeting, remember me, and here's my situation. And I think that's important because there are lots of little situations that township people can help us with if we feel comfortable or know, or go to someone, and even if they're not the right person, they'll tell you where to go. And again, perseverance seems to be the key word because things don't always get done on the first go at it. So we'll start and in alphabetical order. Nancy's going to give a
height. I think we should go reverse height order.
I'm a librarian, so we must go in alphabetical order. I'm sorry. But anyway, Nancy will give a little opening statement and for anyway.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for coming out. We'll be done by 8 o'clock, so we can all go watch the Mets game. But
Is everyone here all right?
A little louder.
am I talking too quietly?
Yes.
Okay, it's kind of what I feel like doing.
We could put a microphone up, shouldn't we?
No,
I
no.
can. I have the microphone if you want.
No, I don't think we need it. Do we,
Okay.
Joy? No. Okay. So I'm Nancy Adams. I've lived in Maplewood since 1989. I have 3 kids and 2 stepkids, all of whom are growing up. There's one left. He's a sophomore at Columbia High School, and we've gone through all the schools. In 1990 or so, I helped restart theater at Tuscan School because the stage had been dark for 30 years. So I started getting involved in the community on a wider scale than schools when I founded College Hill Neighborhood Association, and subsequently, along with the Hilton Neighborhood Association, we founded the Springfield Avenue Partnerships. So that was my foray into, that was several years, if you recall, of getting that started, getting the organization started. It really started with my next door neighbor of just going up and cleaning graffiti and picking up cigarette butts and sort of what we were just talking about with perseverance, and that's really what we did to start the Springfield Avenue Partnership. So after that, I began a career in downtown revitalization, downtown management, and that's what I've been doing for about 20 years. So I think that, I wanted to be, I've been on the planning board for 6 years, so I just wanted to be at the table on the governing body where the decisions ultimately take place, and I feel like my experience, not only in the community but professionally, makes me a very unique and qualified candidate. So I'm not going to talk long on that. I'll let Greg take over.
Okay.
What about you?
Hi, I'm Greg Lembrick. I know many of you in this room, but I'm glad that all of you came out tonight. My wife and I have lived in Maplewood for, it's going to be 9 years in January. We have one daughter. She's 40 years old. She was here at the last debate. She couldn't make it tonight. If she was, she'd be running around, and you'd all know her by now. My background in town is obviously not as long or as deep as Nancy's. I'm sort of the relative newcomer here in Maplewood, but I've always said, having grown up in a family where my father was mayor and on the township committee, and where my mother was always also very active in the community, that when I sort of found the community to call home for me and my family, and when I had the time, I would want to get more involved. And I saw an opportunity to do that this year by running for township committee. And part of the reason that I ran is I looked at my generation, at so many young families that live in this town, and a lot of them just really don't feel engaged in local government and what's going on. And I think that to some extent it's because they haven't really been invited into the process. And I sort of wanted to break that. So I I'm running for Township Committee and look forward to serving on the Township Committee. And one of the things I really want to do is sort of demystify local government and allow people who maybe would like to know more, would like to be more involved, to see how easy it can be, and that they are welcome to be involved, and show people out there that the committee really represents sort of all parts of Maplewood, from people who've had 5 kids go through the school district to someone whose daughter is just about to start the school district. So I think that between us, Nancy and I sort of cover different parts of town and different perspectives, and I think both of us have a lot to offer on the Township Committee, and we look forward to telling you more about that tonight.
Now, we hope that some of you have some questions you might want to ask. Is there anyone who wants to start? No.
Are you prepared to stand with Victor Luca on Springfield Avenue when it's 20 degrees outside and talk to us?
No.
I'm making a joke. But Greg mentioned how the specter of the Township Committee seems to be this slight war between the average citizen. And I remember over the years, I remember Jerry Ryan being out there with Vic and a number of Township Committee people bringing the Township Committee forward to the community. And so you reminded me of that. I think it is wonderful when they do that. They also do it sometimes
In the village.
in the village, in front of the bank or somewhere. And so,
Yeah.
but these beautiful fall mornings you'll enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and Jim, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that's something that both Nancy and I want to do, and and I've really made a focus when I've been campaigning is, people shouldn't just see the Township Committee when we're asking people to vote for us. People should see us out and about in the community, and also at organized times where people can come to the village, can be on Springfield Avenue, and meet with the committee and sort of voice their concerns. And one thing that I definitely want to do is something that both Mayor DeLuca and Marlon Brownlee do, which is have at least once or twice a month sort of have an office hour. Have a time where I say I'm going to be sitting at Village Coffee, or I'm going to be sitting at the Rack or somewhere, and just come by and chat for an hour. I also want to use more social media. I think that's something that particularly for people who maybe haven't been around town for a while, is a way that they might be able to sort of get more information and get involved. And lastly, one thing that maybe it's a crazy idea, but like a lot of other people in Maplewood, I commute daily into Manhattan for work and take the train. And one of the things that I want to offer people once I'm on the committee is, look, if it's, we're all busy, but if you have that 30 or 40 minutes during the commute and you want to talk about a township issue, or you just want to learn about the township, how many people are on the Township Committee, what do we do? Let me know, and you can commute with the committee man, and we'll find a train we can take together, either to the city or home, and it beats sitting there staring at my phone for 40 minutes. So I think I do want to get out there, and I think Nancy feels the same way. We do want to engage with the community, because we are representing you, and we can be most effective in doing that if we know what your concerns are and what your views are.
Yeah, I concur. We'll be mostly, I think the social media, and Greg and I have talked about the social media being utilized more effectively by the township. And I think that's something I certainly could just help the township with in getting that done. I don't think it uses it often enough. In fact, hardly at all I ever see anything. So, I'd like to be able to do it that way. Plus, I'll be ready, Jim, at 20 degrees, since I grew up in Rochester.
Yes, that's right. You're from Rochester.
So,
I remember.
I'm uniquely qualified to stand on Springfield Avenue in 20-degree weather. I asked for your vote because of that.
I want to welcome Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi,
Well,
sorry.
Mary is Mila J.C.
I think you're there.
Cohort in crime, let's put it that way. Mila J.C.'s our representative in the state.
Legislature.
And Mary's her partner, right?
Yeah,
Myla-
Mary's
I'm
her
her
chief of staff.
Chief of Staff.
And that's actually one thing that Greg and I have been trying to remind people really importantly, and everyone here should remind all your neighbors. If you're a Democrat in particular, Myla and John are running for the Assembly for re-election, and they've been incredibly good in the Assembly as far as representing the 27th district and doing so for years. But education and the environment are both their passions, and they are running against an extremely right-wing Republican or independent, Mary. I'm not sure.
He's a Republican. There are two Republicans running against John and Myla.
From Morris County.
Yes, and what people sometimes forget is that the new 27th, as a result of 2010 redistricting, is 8 communities in Essex County and 6 towns in Morris County.
Right.
And let's just say thus far, we have not yet won a single town in Morris County.
Right, so it's really important to turn out the vote
And
in
this
these
is predicted to be one of the
towns.
lowest voter turnouts in decades.
Yeah.
Because the Assembly's at the top of the ticket, and that hasn't happened for 16 years.
And that's important for Maplewood, that John and Myla get elected, and not just because they're so wonderful, but because they're so responsive to us. If we're sitting on the township committee, it's good to have 2 people at the state level who we can work with, and we can ask for help on issues that help Maplewood. And one of those is property taxes. I've talked a little bit with Myla about that already, and there has been efforts by the legislators to try to get, they don't expect anything to happen with our current governor, so another 2 years before it, but to try to reformulate the way the state is funded and not rely so heavily on property taxes. So because we're fully developed in Maplewood, right, and we have very little control over the costs and the property taxes. Having like 28% of your tax bill goes to Maplewood. The rest most of it goes to the school district and to the county. So that heavy reliance on property taxes really affects the first suburbs like us, in that we're fully built up. There's not a lot of room for new rateables, new construction. We're not, Florham Park, where they have huge office complexes. We don't have a huge mall. So it all gets, the burden is on us residents. And I think the current township committee has done an admirable job of trying to keep that. They've stayed under the 2% cap. But we all are struggling with that, and especially our seniors. We want our seniors to be able to stay in town and not have to move because they can't afford the property taxes. And if I might segue into something that Greg and I have also talked a lot about, is bringing more and better senior services to our senior citizen population in town. I think they've been underserved, and we want to look at that and work with Senior Share on figuring out ways, their needs, first of all, and also how we can come up with some solutions.
And and on that, just to piggyback, one of the opportunities that I think we have, and this is really a great moment to pursue it, is to partner with other neighboring communities to work together on providing enhanced and improved senior services. I know it's something that I've spoken with Sheena Calm about. I think you've spoken with Sheena about it. She's very interested in, it doesn't need to just be she's the village president of South Orange. And senior issues, even before she was village president, senior issues in South Orange have always been a passion of hers. And so it's and there's no reason why it has to be just South Orange and Maplewood. There's other communities, Millburn and other neighboring communities that we can bring in and help with that. And as Nancy mentioned, we also want to look at what opportunities there may be, either with property taxes or other options for seniors who who can no longer afford to stay in their house or are looking to downsize but don't want to leave the community. And I think that's something that both Nancy and I are committed to exploring. And
our Assemblywoman, Mila, did they propose a bill for freezing taxes on property taxes on senior citizens?
Yes, there is a bill that, we sent out. I'm sorry, I'm not contagious, but I have this hacking cough left over from bronchitis. We have continuously adopted a bill that has allowed for senior citizens. There are certain requirements that have to be met, but it's called the Property Tax Reimbursement Program, and it's known as the Senior Freeze.
Right.
And depending on your income and how long you've lived in New Jersey and in your home, your taxes can be frozen. And once they're frozen, as long as your income stays under the set amount, and it's the deadline on it was yesterday, we sent out 30. I'm gonna tell you in all honesty, it was almost 30,000 letters. I mean, 35,000 letters that were targeted to people saying, you need to know about this program. And they would call, they would ask for information about it. We gave them a hotline number because we want to get the word out, because this is a particular program that the state doesn't advertise. Because if everybody took advantage of the senior freeze, because once you establish your baseline, if you remain eligible, when your property taxes increase, yours do not. And many, many people have taken advantage of it because we've done a good job getting the word out. And one of the issues is the school funding formula. There's a lot of talk about the school funding formula. John and Mila both support fully funding the formula. I didn't bring the stats with me tonight, but South Orange, Maplewood and South Orange's property school contribution, state aid contribution, would increase by approximately 50%. So it would be dramatic. There are other communities where it's more dramatic. Some are less because they're getting more now. So we're doing our best. Assemblyman McKeon wrote the law that imposed the 2% property tax cap, but we know that this is the biggest single problem that residents in New Jersey face, and Essex County, the taxes are the highest in anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere. Essex County are the highest in the state.
Thank you, Mary.
I just wanted to add on, I missed what you were saying at the end, but Jim is a musician, and he plays events at other senior citizens, at other towns for seniors. So I think that one suggestion might be, it would be nice to work together, but even to just go and get some mentorship or get some ideas, because he always comes home and feels like some of these places have a lot more
than
things going on that we could learn from. We don't have to, join them necessarily.
Well, and Senior Share, that was started by, was it started by Kirk Kiley?
And Irene, yeah.
Yeah, Kirk Kiley is very serious.
Right, and they've done a lot of research already, and they've been, surveying seniors.
And there's another meeting Saturday morning.
Saturday morning.
And
where is it being held?
At
Les Saisons.
Oh, that's right.
Les Saisons.
Yeah, the bed and breakfast.
Bed and breakfast.
At what time?
9:30. So, and one other thing, it may go without saying, but another thing that's yet another reason to support Mila Jacey and John McKeon, as opposed to their opponents who are from out in Monmouth County, is one of the reasons we're able to get so much attention.
Morris.
What did I say? Morris. Sorry. So much attention. Is Mila is from this community. She's from South Orange, and John's from West Orange, and so they have a really through all their years in the legislature, and also just by virtue of being local, they really understand and care about the issues that are facing us here. And just to follow on something that Mary said, what we're pursuing here that would help significantly increase the aid that Maplewood receives, it isn't. We're not asking for a new formula. We're not asking. We're asking for the state to just fund and apply the formula that it has. And again, that's something that I think we may need to wait for a new governor. But to sort of get on a political soapbox. I know for me, when deciding who to vote for in 2017 for governor, and anyone who's going to come to this town and ask for votes is going to have to talk about what they're going to do for communities like ours in terms of state funding equity. Because as I go around and talk to people, and they ask me the question over and over that goes something like this: we pay here in Maplewood among the highest property taxes in the nation, yet our schools are overcrowded and underfunded. How can you explain that? And what is the magic bullet to fix that? And really the way that we could go a long way to fixing that would be to have the state actually take responsibility and actually fully fund the formula and apply the formula that would give Maplewood and South Orange our just our fair share of state aid, which as Mary said would be dramatic. We're not talking about thousands of dollars, we're talking about millions of dollars every year.
That's correct. And just so everyone knows, probably about 4 years ago, John and Mila were the lead sponsors of a bill that would have allowed the first suburbs to receive additional aid under the formula, because as first suburb communities that are contiguous to Abbott, the former Abbott districts, we have a lot of the same issues that the Abbotts face, but we don't get any additional resources to help address those very issues. Mm-hmm. And it's a source of ongoing frustration. There are not a lot of communities in the state that fall into categories like ours, where we have excellent schools surrounded by schools that have a whole lot of challenges.
Right.
So unfortunately, because most legislators don't have diverse districts such as ours, you can't get the kind of momentum to address it. So it looks like the school funding formula is going to be the way to go. But just wanted you to know, we tried multiple times to get additional aid because of the uniqueness of our situation.
And before we leave this issue, I just one of the things I want to mention that was really important to me, and I was almost late tonight because I was in front of King's talking with Elizabeth Baker from the school board, and we kept talking about different issues, but the one we kept coming back to is that for the different forms of local government in our community to sort of all be working separately and not come together is really missing an opportunity. And if we have some representatives from the SOMA Board of Ed, from the Maplewood Township Committee, from the South Orange Board of Trustees who come together and coordinate and get on the same page, we can be that much more forceful in our advocacy together on some of these issues, and that's something that we're certainly planning going forward. And a lot more communication with the Board of Education and trying to work together to see what we can do. And one of those issues, which is the way that Elizabeth and I kicked off the conversation as we were getting off the train, actually comes back to something that Carol mentioned. I think all of us are aware of, which we thought of the pedestrian incident with the child today. And that's something in terms of the safety issue of our children all across our community being adequately secure when they're on their way to school. And there's intersections, particularly here on along Springfield Avenue and in the Hilton community, that don't have crossing guards, that don't have adequate crosswalks, and that are just disasters waiting to happen. And that's something that that I think the local government can work with the Board of Ed and figure out where are the problem areas and where can we use more crossing guards, where can we do things with traffic to make our kids safer as they're walking to school. And that's not a political issue. That's just a human safety issue that I think all of us can agree on. It's just a matter of having the will to sit down together and figure out a solution.
Another question? Well, I have just in case our committee came up with a few. Well, we've talked about this before, but apartment development in Maplewood. How do you feel about the abundance of new apartment construction in our town? And where's the tipping point or whatever? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think I'm assuming you don't mind if I
No, please do.
As I've said before, my work has been in revitalization and redevelopment, and because we're so built up, I think most of our projects here are redevelopment projects as opposed to new development projects, and that's important because utilizing properties that are vacant or abandoned, and making properties perform, if you will, with the highest and best use. Most new redevelopment projects and apartments are studio 1 or 2 bedroom. So there's and stats from Rutgers and the Blaustein School and all that, they do, and it does play out that large apartment complexes that are happening all over the state, and mostly in redevelopment areas and in towns that are already built up, don't produce a whole lot of school children. It's actually 1 or 2 school children, and so that's usually the fear. It's not, you know, it might be 5 children in one and no children in another, but a lot of the reasons people move into those apartments in our town, they're coming from Brooklyn, as we know, with our new newspaper headline of Brooklyn West. They come from Jersey City, they come from New York City, and with the goal of moving here, getting to know the community, and then buying a house. There's also those of us who are getting older and don't need these bigger houses that we had when we were raising our families, in downsizing because we want to stay in Maplewood because it's a great place to live. So I don't think I think the tipping point will be when we have no vacant sites and no redevelopment properties that need to be done. But I think it's mostly a good thing.
So can I?
On the apartment issue, I just couldn't help but throw out a phrase which might tickle some people here. But are the abundance of apartments reflected in people's minds as the situation we had with nail salons? I thought I would get a couple chuckles. Is that the concern?
I think we had a meeting here at one of our, a couple of months ago. The man who's developing the property on where the church was.
Boyden Avenue.
Boyden Avenue. And one of the,
Methodist Church.
yes, and one of the statements that somebody made was, I moved out of the city to come here, and now I don't want Maplewood. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I don't want
Finish
Maplewood
it.
to start looking like the place I moved out of,
Yeah.
which has a lot of, you know, multiple buildings. No, it doesn't seem to be economically viable to build houses anymore
Right.
on these properties.
Yeah.
So that was, the way you put it was very effective. That's another concern, not only the schools, but keeping the character of Maplewood, you know, not, as he said, it's starting to look like the place I left, you know. So it's just something.
Well, there's so much the housing stock all over town is already dense. So where these apartments are being built are on major streets like Boyden Avenue, like Springfield Avenue, and not so much in the neighborhood streets.
Yeah, within that.
Has anybody driven by the old Red Devil site lately?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Which is that? The one?
Vauxhall.
And that's in Union, actually, but still, close enough. I don't know what they're gonna do when everybody leaves for work at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Well,
I just want to say that,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
just want to say that
Could you
some
speak
of
a
the
little louder?
demographics of Maplewood has changed a little bit. I'm not worried about it. But what happens when that happens, if they are buying or renting something that is difficult for them to afford, they are taking in boarders or renters to help them with their financial management of the piece of property that they have, whether it's an apartment or a home. So, you know, I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not for or against apartments or houses. I just want you to know that it's happening. And I don't see that it will change unless our economy really flourishes. So,
There are housing codes
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, people are living
That I don't know
illegally.
exactly what they are.
Yeah, exactly, me neither, but there are housing codes that are not allowed to have boarders
That's right.
in town, so
They're not
that's an
relevant.
enforcement issue as well.
You have to report it, though.
Yeah,
You can't
exactly. They're not
look
gonna
at it and say,
search.
oh, look what they're doing, and that's it. You have to call Bob and
Bob,
Minimize.
and try to have the house inspected, and if they find, and we had one in our neighborhood, an illegal bedroom and kitchen in a basement, then it's gotta be dealt with.
Right, and that's always been the case.
Yeah.
Not, you know, to avoid ducking the question, I think I didn't actually respond yet. And I'll preface what I'm going to say by, you know, saying that one of the criticisms of township committees in the past has been, because it's an entirely Democratic committee, sort of there's not a diversity of viewpoint represented, or things tend to be in lockstep. And I think that, you know, with the addition of both Nancy and myself, I think, you know, if there's one thing you won't see, it's unanimity of opinion and everyone being in lockstep or being afraid to express a contrary view. And this is actually an area where there's some disagreement between me and Nancy, and you know, and that's, you know, I think that's healthy, that's good.
Of course, I'm right, but.
But no, you know, and I, you know, I think, you know, and our disagreement is not a 180-degree disagreement, but I think that I am much more skeptical of putting high-density residential apartments in Maplewood. I think if there's one thing Maplewood doesn't really need more of, it's residential housing. You know, I don't think we need apartments, particularly when so often in the past, both, you know, especially the recent past, you know, it's been done with tax abatements, with pilots. You know, so if the goal is what is the highest and best use, I think that, you know, we can't just look at the bottom line in terms of dollars and cents for highest and best use, particularly because those dollars and cents, you know, oftentimes don't come at least immediately to the town. They go to others. I think we need to look at, you know, what do we want in town? What do we want the character of our town to be? You know, and to me, you know, obviously there's room for reasonable minds to disagree, but 235 apartments going up across from the town pool, right there on Springfield Avenue on the PSE&G site, I don't think that's a positive addition for Maplewood. And that's not the sort of project that I'm going to support on the township committee.
And the issue is a little more complicated than whether or not we want more housing or you know, or if we want, you know, this certain thing. The issue is finding, unless, you know, the town wants to pay for it, or the town wants to build apartments or be a landlord or do any of that stuff. It's very difficult to find developers or people who want to buy a property, especially one with such, you know, environmental mitigation and all the issues that went with the PSE&G site. So the economics are such that there needs to be some density of housing, and especially on that end of Springfield Avenue, that's been so difficult to fill vacancies for as long as I've lived here. This will very much help fill those vacant commercial properties on Springfield Avenue with businesses that are desirable by giving them more of a residential base, walkable, and to be customers for those businesses.
But, you know, but I think that, you know, if what you're sensing is that, you know, Lembrook is going to vote against any new residential development, and Adams is going to vote for any new. You know, I think that, you know, that's too extreme. You know, we're going to take each one as they come, but you know, I think just looking at recent examples, I think that, you know, had we been on the committee, in theory, there are certain projects that have you know, been proposed and accepted recently where I think I would have voted no.
And there's other projects that you probably would have. I would expect the Universal Chain site right over here that is expanding again, which I think was beautifully done residential development to an awful abandoned factory building that was there. Abandoned, I think it was it still functioning when I got here in '89? I don't even think so, right?
It hadn't been for years.
Yeah, exactly, but it's now it's productive and it's beautiful development. So I think there's room for
One thing
both.
Well,
Clearly we'll.
Yeah, no, and one
Clearly
thing.
we'll argue about it.
Yeah.
And we'll figure stuff out.
And that was, one thing about that in particular, and I know that, ultimately it didn't prove viable, but one of the things that was discussed and which was so exciting about that project was there was at least going to be some element of that project which was going to be 55 plus, senior restricted housing. And that's something that I think, outside of Winchester Gardens, we really don't have,
I agree.
in South Orange and Maplewood, sort of a large, a lot of housing that's restricted for seniors, and that's really, under New Jersey law, the only kind of housing discrimination that's allowed. And I've actually said, people have said, oh, you're 100% against pilots, and I said, actually, no, I could get behind a tax abatement or some subsidies from the town, if it would allow for senior housing and that would allow seniors to stay in the community that they help build.
When the man came up talking about that property that on Boyd, I asked about, are there any house apartments there for, I was talking about seniors, but they call it lower income. And there's some kind of state number that you have to have, or you can pay into this township.
That's the affordable housing.
Yeah, it's
affordable. And it seems like, anyone who develops either does the very minimum of affordable housing, which is required by law, or doesn't have any and they pay something, that money to the town that's used to help people keep up their property. But I just wish there were a way that we could force or get builders to have the conscience, which I don't know about that happening. Not that I have anything against builders, but, so that would require more low-income apartments within these apartments. If we have to have them.
Affordable.
And Carol, if I can address that, there's sort of, the issue of the affordable housing under COA and the 55 plus senior housing is separate, even though many seniors on fixed incomes, might qualify. So there's state regulations about that. And
right now in complete
disarray.
Yeah,
disarray. But in terms of Maplewood specifically, the reason why in many instances the township actually encourages developers to contribute to the trust fund as opposed to putting the housing there is because Maplewood is sort of, we're in a position where we've more than met our requirement for new residential affordable housing, but where we're far behind is in being able to fund affordable housing in existing housing. And so actually the money is actually more helpful to the town than the new housing would be, because we're already above where we need to be on one and we're below where we need to be on the other, so the money will help us get back. But I think we should, the idea of 55 plus housing, would, because oftentimes the affordable housing, it'll just be a certain percentage of units. So, in something like Maplewood Crossing, there'll be a number of units, but in something as small as, say, the Post House, there would have been maybe one unit. But a 55 plus would be, would actually be a community that was limited throughout the complex.
Well, as someone who is 55 plus, I would prefer not living in an apartment with only 55 plus people.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. I think a lot of people would rather live in a place where there's all ages, rather than only people our age.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more interesting.
Right.
So
Well,
that's just something.
Within a mile,
Age
there's
diversity.
such a huge difference from what we see next door in Union to here. It's horrendous. They have 5 huge senior houses to help people stay in the community.
Yeah.
Hey, Erin?
So let's talk about my favorite street in Maplewood, Springfield Avenue. What type of businesses would you like to see come to the avenue? And how would you use your position on the township to be able to see that happen?
I'd love to see a really good pub, restaurant business on Springfield Avenue preferably like where all of us in College Hill and in Hilton could easily get to. And so that's I think that's something we really need. One of the things that, you know, is so nice about Maplewood Village is that there's several restaurants you can go to, there's choices, so I'd like to have more of that. And it's really that kind of destination business that would be open later than a lot of businesses are open on Springfield Avenue and would give some nightlife to the street. That would also spur other businesses to come there. I mean, that's just the way it works. Probably other restaurants that stay open later, BYOs that would stay open later, if we had a good anchor restaurant bar, if you will. So for me, I would also like to see some recreational type business, for profit type business. If I was on the township committee, I would want to work with the network of commercial property and business owners that I know, or real estate agents that I know, and existing businesses in other towns that might want to open a second or third location here, and there's some sites that I think could be great. And that would be something that would also be, sort of be like a youth, almost like a youth recreational or type of game type business that's also a profitable business. And I clearly have one in mind, so there's, so hopefully with an official capacity of being on the township committee, that would give me the opportunity to approach some people with some real validity and try to match them up with the property owner, which is what I've done for years in my work. So.
And just to maybe build a little bit more on what Nancy was saying, I do think something she alluded to, which is, you know, particularly in business, in a community, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that, you know, no one wants to be, you know, the only thriving store or restaurant in the neighborhood, because, you know, people aren't going to come in. And one of the things that really makes the village work so well is the synergy of the combination of villages, of businesses there. And, you know, and it makes it seem more walkable. Even though, you know, there's stretches of Springfield Avenue which are very walkable, but I don't think they get the same amount of pedestrian traffic or the same amount of, well, you know, I'm going to this place, but so long as I'm here, I'm going to sort of stroll around and see what else is here and stop into a few other shops. And I think that's something that you see much more often in Maplewood Village than I've seen on Springfield Avenue, where people tend to sort of target their one destination, find a parking spot as close as possible, go, and then leave without sort of walking a couple of blocks and meandering into a store. So, you know, if you start, you know, sort of, if you get a successful anchor, if you get successful businesses, and then that'll attract more people who want to be there because, well, you know, a bunch of people are already coming for that bar, so if I'm next to the bar, I'm across the street, that'll help drive customers to me, and I really think we can get the momentum going that way. And, you know, on the topic of bars or getting a pub, you know, one of the things that's really holding, I think, some of those opportunities back in Maplewood right now is the lack of liquor licenses, which is not something that we can deal with directly as members of the Township Committee, but something that, you know, we can lobby the state to do, to allow within the county for, you know, for intra-county liquor license transfers, because I don't know the latest statistics, but there's something like 80 or 100 liquor licenses in Newark that are currently unused. And, you know, if we could bring a couple of those into Maplewood, I don't think you'd see a dramatic decline in the value of the existing liquor licenses. You know, St. James Gate is not going to lose business and go out of business because we have a successful bar on Springfield Avenue. I think, again, a rising tide lifts all boats. And, you know, and there's also mechanisms to compensate existing liquor license holders in a community when other licenses are brought in. So that's something I think we can push the state for, and there's actually, you know, there is a fair bit of support, but there's also a lot of opposition. But that would be an opportunity that would allow us to have maybe some thriving, you know, a pub or a restaurant that served alcohol without having to put another one in town out of business.
Yeah, there is legislation, there's a bill that's been being worked on by members of the ICSC, which is International Council of Shopping Centers, and they've been working in conjunction with some legislators and commercial property developers, to try to loosen the strict liquor license laws in the state, and to figure out a mechanism to compensate. You know, if you bought your house for $500,000, that's what people are paying for a liquor license, and then all of a sudden there's other ones available for much cheaper. Your next door neighbor sells their house for, you know, $50,000, you'd be pretty upset. So there is a definitely, but they have come up with tax incentives and breaks, but it's still quite a fight down in Trenton now. I'd love to talk to John and Milo about that as well, so hopefully we will.
There's also legislation that's being talked about by a very influential assemblyman from South Jersey that would create a new class of liquor licenses. Sort of, some states have the limited consumption licenses, the beer and wine licenses. I know Nancy can tell you, because of her downtown experience, more about certain restaurants. You can, I think we passed legislation
There is, yeah,
that
for
you can use New Jersey,
New Jersey
you can have
wines.
New Jersey wine, but this would be a limited consumption license for wine and beer. And they're also talking about, it's still in the planning stages, but this is a statewide problem of understanding that in order to help revitalize downtowns, you need destinations. There are, in a lot of communities, such as Maplewood, there are a limited number of liquor licenses, and this would be a way to expand the number of licenses, subject, of course, to Nancy's very well articulated concern about the existing license holders and the dissatisfaction they would have at the mere thought that there would be another license available, and how that could be made more equitable.
And, you know, and not to, you know, remain on the topic of liquor for too long, but, you know, on the topic of Springfield Avenue, on Aaron's initial question, you know, I am excited by the new liquor store that's going to be coming in on Springfield Avenue at the former bank site. You know, the plans I've seen and talking to the owner, I think, you know, we're really going to have something, you know, sort of wine library quality, with a big focus on craft beers. And I know a lot of people in Maplewood are looking forward to having that close by, and looking forward to, you know, a chance to get some of the stuff that we usually have to go outside of Maplewood to buy there. And that's something else that I think is going to bring people to Springfield Avenue. And the more destinations we can make that bring people to the avenue, the more, you know, the better chance we have that while they're on their way to that destination, they'll say, oh, well, there's a restaurant or there's a store that I'd like to see. And then we've got more pedestrian traffic, more people walking down the street and wandering into stores. And, you know, the more that happens, the more people will want to be there. And I think we can just, you know, hopefully it'll snowball from there.
Yeah, well, the walkability of Springfield Avenue does create a problem. It's a 2-mile long strip from Irvington to Milburn, Vauxhall. So when we were working in the early stages back in the day on Springfield Avenue plans and trying to figure out a way to create walkable areas, I mean, we, you know, managed to get the state to give us control of the avenue and put 1 lane in each direction and turning and parking on the north side, which didn't exist before, and created those nodes so that at Prospect Street, you know, and right now the node, if it's, I'm not sure they still refer to it as that on the Springfield Avenue Partnership, but that's what they were then, and that was one of them, whereas it's 4 corners, it's individual storefronts near each other. Now it's sort of the health and wellness section and stuff, so there's a little bit of walking around there, but again, it's such a long stretch that you really, that's kind of the only way you can really combat that inability to walk it. So,
It's, you know, it's sort of to have districts, you know,
yeah.
so that, you know, even if people aren't going to walk from one end to the other, you know, the people can, you know, see that, oh, you know, within this few blocks, there's a number of things I'd like to do, so that, you know, people don't just, you know, park, run in, and then leave.
Yeah.
Does anyone have an, I'm sorry.
No.
Before we, I keep looking at the clock, but it's covered up, but it's.
They're gonna do something, I complain, they're gonna do something about it.
Oh, good.
They're gonna put a clock on.
About 8:30.
They covered it. It's past 8:30. Yeah, it's, one last question, or anyone have anything?
About those nodes on Springfield Avenue and the library, I think they're very dangerous, especially the one by the library. It's awful and really worse when the kids come out of school.
You mean that section of Springfield Avenue?
But cement that sticks out.
The nose.
Well, those are,
Are you
those are
talking
the
about
bump
Baker
outs.
Street?
Bump out.
Yeah.
Baker
Oh, yeah,
Street?
over by the main branch of Baker Street, you mean, not the Hilton
No,
branch?
they're very
Oh,
dangerous.
okay.
Yeah, so that sort of bump out where,
Really,
Yeah, I mean, typically what those are for is to narrow the amount of time a pedestrian has to be in the middle of the street, right, crossing it, but, I think that's, more of the congestion issue with the kids getting out of
If
school.
you're not familiar with
It's a
it,
place to dump
you
the
can
stuff.
have a
And we don't know
problem.
its name.
Now we know.
Stop or not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very dangerous, it really
Yeah.
is.
Well, there's a safety issue, as we talked about briefly earlier, and we didn't really address it, so I wouldn't, I have some thoughts on it, and actually Greg and I spoke about it.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I think you bring up a broader, a safety issue of, of vehicle safety and pedestrian safety.
Yeah.
And, it's something that, I was actually, as I was leaving the train station to get here tonight, I actually went by there, and a number of young people were crossing crossing Baker Street, nowhere near a crosswalk. And, and it was dark, and, fortunately I take things, because I know that's a tight area there, I take it very slow, but, and I know it's an issue, certainly if you drive anywhere near, that area of Parker or Valley, near when school is starting or getting out.
It's terrible at the middle school.
Yeah.
When they get out of school.
Yeah.
I waited
But-
almost 5 minutes in
But
traffic.
what are you gonna do? Build a middle school in the middle of the park somewhere, you know? I
No,
mean,
but I think
they've
we-
gotta be where they can be picked up and,
Well, it's safety hazard.
Or they can
I
walk.
just
well,
think-
that's why we have a police officer there when school gets out. And that's the reason for the bump outs, so that people will slow down and not speed through that corner,
I
which
think
was
the
the
whole-
issue before the bump outs were created.
But I think we need some kind of a campaign about safety in our town, because I
Oh,
don't
you
know,
might
I don't know if
start
it's
it.
my imagination, but it just seems that people do not obey the traffic.
The crosswalk situation's terrible. Nobody yields to pedestrians. There really needs to be like a ticket blitz,
Well,
like
I
they did
agree
in
with
South
you.
Orange over the summer with the decoy pedestrians.
Yep, I could be easily that,
Me
because
too.
I do
I
it every
volunteer with my
day.
dog.
I think also with that, I think we need driver education, but we also need pedestrian education as well. I purposely, when I pick my daughter up from her childcare center to go home in College Hill, I do not drive on Prospect because so many pedestrians walk wearing their black trench coats from New York when it's incredibly dark. And I am
Yeah.
terrified of
Yeah,
hitting a
it's
human
like-
because they're wearing black and black and I'm not going to see them at night.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it may look a little dorky, but wearing reflectors, just like the runners wear, or adding better lighting at the corners, because it's sometimes hard, especially if you're new to town, to know where all the little streets run when you're going along some of the roads. So I think it's a combination of everybody needs to be better.
Yeah, information is definitely helpful, but I agree with you on the pedestrian crosswalk issue. And it's revenue. We start enforcing and ticketing. And that's a nice part of it.
You have
but
the same
enforcement's
people
the worst.
using the same roads every morning, so I mean, I think there's lessons that could be quickly learned. by-
Absolutely, by doing a
Yeah.
blitz, you're right. And Prospect Street, I think we all probably know that nobody speeds on Prospect Street because you know that there's often a police officer stationed right by the Crescent or other areas. Well, there's a lot less.
Right over by Prospect Church, there's a lot of police enforcement.
Yeah.
Right around that area.
Plus Prospect is inordinately wide for a 25-mile-an-hour zone, so it's easy to go fast on it. But enforcement, in my view, is the best way, and whether it's targeted, like stings, if you will, or little projects all over town in problem areas where you have police officers stationed there, and moving them around. So people get the sense, people get used to the fact that they have to watch, yeah.
Yeah, and Nancy and I have a number of ideas that we've been discussing just in the last couple of days, and particularly today as things heated up on social media about things. And Nancy, I mean, I know you have a lot of experience with that.
Traffic calming measures, you know, increased striping on the street at intersections that have been dangerous. The raised crosswalks are good, and signage, 2 stop signs instead of 1, reflectors like they do at the corner of Harvard and Prospect. And that was put in after a lot of concerns at that intersection of cars not yielding and, you know, having to slam their brakes and run up on a lawn. So there are traffic calming measures. I'm personally not a big fan of speed bumps. I don't think, I mean, these streets have been around for 100+ years, and cars almost as long. While speed bumps do slow down traffic, sometimes they don't, sometimes they traject over them. But the worst part of them is the emergency response, and of emergency vehicles have to go over the speed bumps too. So you have an ambulance coming, you're having a heart attack, you have a fire happening, and they have to slow down in order to get to you. So enforcement and other traffic calming measures are much more preferable to me.
Yeah, and yes, you know, and that's, yeah, I mean, you know, and it's not as though they have a button they can push that makes them go away when there's a fire. But you know, another thing that I think is a factor, is a safety factor in terms of traffic and pedestrians and bicyclists in Maplewood that I see all the time, not just in my own area but throughout town, is sometimes I've come to a corner, and because of trees that are a little overgrown, hedges, bushes, you know, you almost have to be not only into the crosswalk, but almost into the intersection before you can really see around the corner.
It's a sight line.
Yeah, you know, sight lines, and also sometimes, you know, people just park too close to the corner. And I've even seen there's an intersection near where I live where a police officer likes to sit right on the corner. And in the morning, I sometimes find that I'm really having to sort of try to look through her window to see if there's someone coming from behind her. And you know, so I think that's something we can also look at, is, you know, where we can be more diligent in terms of sight lines.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I know Mayor DeLuca thinks may have been a factor. You know, he lives a half a block from where the incident today occurred, so he knows the area intimately, and you know, he thinks that may have been a factor. And one thing that has come out, I haven't spoken to the police chief today, but you know, that I did hear through the police department, was that speed was not a factor in today's incident. Was that the driver was going at or below the speed limit, he or she just didn't stop.
Or didn't see.
You know, and so most likely, I mean, I can't imagine that anyone would see the child and choose to keep going. So you know, if speed wasn't a factor, it may have been a visibility issue, and you know, it may not have been, you know, a hedge or a bush or something. It may have been they were looking at their phone, or they were talking to the person next to them. There's any number of things that might cause, you know, and that's something else that, you know, Maplewood has already started doing some crackdowns on. I know they were doing it on Valley Street for a while, where the police were actually actively looking for people distracted driving, people on cell phones, people texting, things like that.
It's education and enforcement. I mean, and educating the residents who live at corners as to what their responsibility is, and if there's, you know, their own personal property of bushes or trees that are, you know, impeding the sight distance for people coming to those, then the police need to enforce that, code enforcement needs to enforce that, and we need to educate them better about you need to trim these back, you can't have it. I think, in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, we have a tree in our yard that needs to be, the umbrella of which needs to be, it grew back again.
But it seems like education is always brought up, that we need to educate people, but how is that done in this town?
Well, that's what I think both of us would definitely use social media more than it's used right now. And having the information on the website, so using social media to let people know.
But those, I mean, having it on the website, it's like, yeah, you know, those few people or whoever, not just few, but
yeah,
those certain people will check that website, but so many people that are not following the rules or whatever aren't even checking it, you
Right.
know?
Well,
Right,
and-
well,
and,
that's
you
where
know-
you give out warning, or at least go and do the code enforcement issue.
You know,
The same way you would if your sidewalk was not repaired or, you know.
And I would say, you know, the most painful and therefore effective method of education is sometimes enforcement. You know, if someone gets a ticket, you know, and if someone thinks, well, you know, I'm trying to rush to catch this train, or you know, to get to this meeting or whatever, you know, but they think, you know, but you know, if I get pulled over, you know, it's going to be expensive, and also like, you know, I'm going to spend 20 minutes sitting by the side of the road. You know, that person may be more careful next time.
But there is, you know, a lot of people don't even think of that. If they live in a corner and they don't even realize that they're blocking the sight lines. So, you know, mostly it would be, at first anyway, in this issue, would be letting people know, even not necessarily a citation, but where that happens, police, I believe it would be the police would be in charge of enforcing that. But give out that information, have a flyer to give out, and even houses that are having that problem.
We don't even have those crosswalks. Like, I live on the corner of Rutgers and Lexington. You can't even see that white crosswalk. There's 2 stop signs. I was leaving today and a car went right through the stop. They don't even pay any attention to the 2 stop signs.
I know, there's a lot, well, that's, you know, yeah, there's a lot of that, and that's the kind of thing, that's not education, that's enforcement, so. If
It's a
the
matter of
painting
people
on
do
the.
not have driver's licenses.
Mhm.
They are from very different places now.
Well, these
They may
people all
not
come
even
from
know how to
Union and they
read.
drive through.
Right. And you know, and one thing that, you know,
Driving without a license.
speaking of union, you know, one thing, and I'm not a huge fan of this as a general matter, but where there's particularly troublesome intersections where people are running stop signs, running red lights, not stopping for pedestrians, you know, the traffic cameras, you know, are available, and you know, it's, you know, there is an upfront cost to installing that, but you know, to refer to
You
something.
can't use it.
What?
Not to
They're
get
not allowed
tickets.
anymore.
They're not allowed anymore.
Not to get tickets.
They're not?
Yeah, they took them offline.
No, they.
Yep, they're offline.
Changed the
They're
law.
there to scare you, and they still do that, which I'd say, good, leave them there.
Well, I mean, my wife got a ticket just a few months ago. When did this happen?
Put them there and make them flash. Put them there and make them flash.
Last year.
Person worried
It's
for
hard to call
24
lawyer.
hours.
Yeah.
December 14th.
It was after I got one in Union.
Okay. All right. So maybe that would not be as effective,
Yeah.
but you know, but
Instead of the cameras, though, police enforcement and police presence is huge.
Yeah.
Because people, you know, they won't see the camera, they won't see that, they may get a ticket, they may not. But if they see a police officer with a car pulled over, with the lights on, writing a ticket, tomorrow when they're on their way to work, then they think, I'm not going to speed through the street
Right.
anymore. I'm going to slow down and obey the speed limit so I don't get a ticket.
And that's why
And that's
I
really
keep
the
saying
key.
enforcement is really.
Police presence is huge.
All right, I'm going to say this is long enough. I'm going to, we've been going on. And
One
it's-
more, she can ask the one more.
Okay, this is the last question.
I
Very
requested
short.
a speed on Rutgers Street. So what do? They send a patrol car, park it next door to my house with police written all over it. So of course, they're gonna slow down. They're not gonna pay any attention because
Well, hopefully next time they'll think that there might be another police car there or nearby, and they'll do the
well,
same thing.
and another thing
It does
that
work.
another thing that they do to gather data is that, you know, is they can put up those, you know.
Traffic count?
Yeah, you know,
Or the things that say
yeah, you know,
how fast you're going.
the things they have faster on, but you know, they have those that display it, but they also have ones that don't display it, where they just sort of, you know, without you even knowing it, they're checking the average speed and how many people are speeding. So that's something they can do to sort of gather data about, you know, where we might need traffic calming procedures and.
well, they told me we don't want a speed bump there. I said no, because they do fly over those things.
Yeah, they can be more dangerous than you think, yeah.
Well,
So.
this has been very informative, and I really want to thank you two.
Thank you.